Hello everybody and welcome to Philosophy 2550A, Moral Psychology. I'm Dr. Josh Redstone and I'm going to be your instructor this semester. So for the early summer session, we're going to be learning about the psychological underpinnings of morality in this class. And today, I thought what I would do is just sort of provide a survey of the course, the learning outcomes, the evaluation, the lecture schedule. Basically, we're just going to be going over the course outline. I'll say a little bit about how I plan to teach this class, a little bit about me and my background, and then set things up for the next lecture, I think. So, I just want to say once again, welcome to all of my students. I think I have about 40 students in this class. Welcome to all of you. I'm so glad you decided to take this course because it's going to be an interesting course. Welcome to anyone else who may be watching, and I hope you're all staying safe out there owing to the present situation with COVID-19 and all that. So I hope all of you are safe and healthy and looking forward to learning about the psychological underpinnings of morality. So, let's get started. So yes, I'm Dr. Josh Redstone. Please call me Josh. You don't have to call me Professor or Dr. Redstone or anything fancy like that. This is the second time I've taught this course. I had a fantastic time teaching it the first time a few years ago, also during the summer. And back in the day I was also a TA for this course. So this is one of those classes that is kind of close to my heart, not just because I've done it before, but because I'm really interested in the kinds of things we'll be covering today. But before we get to that, I just want to tell you a little bit about my background in case you haven't had a class with me before. So I have a BA and an MA in philosophy, and I focus primarily on philosophy of mind, artificial intelligence, robotics, things like that. I guess you could say my research is specifically focused at this intersection of philosophy of mind, cognitive science, and social robotics. And I'm interested in theoretical questions that arise there, so more philosophical questions, as well as empirical questions that arise there. And of course this includes moral questions, such as whether machines might be considered moral agents or moral patients one day, robots making ethical decisions or being the subject of ethical decisions, that type of thing. So there's some overlap there with my own research interests and with those of this course. My PhD, however, is not in philosophy. My PhD is in cognitive science, which is the interdisciplinary study of the mind, or of the mental. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that as the course unfolds, because as we'll see, this class is highly interdisciplinary. It's really not just a philosophy class. It's not really just a psychology class either. I'm not really sure what kind of class it is, but it's highly interdisciplinary, and that's one of the things that I think will make it fun to teach and fun for you to learn about. Alright, so just some quick administrative stuff. For my students, if you need to reach out to me, you can always send me an email. I tend to answer emails within 24 hours. And of course my email is in the course outline for this class, which is available on CU Learn. Or it's also available in the PowerPoint slides for this lecture, which you will find on CU Learn. CU Learn is, of course, I suppose, the hub of this class. It is where you will find links for all of the other stuff that I'm going to be talking about now. And of course, video lectures will be uploaded to this YouTube channel. So if you need to get a hold of me, you can email me, or you can also discuss material from the lecture in the YouTube comment section with me or with one another, or in our discussion forums on CU Learn. And I highly recommend you do that if you have any questions, any lingering questions, especially since this course is being taught online and we don't have the opportunity to interact with one another in person. So it would be really good if we could all engage with each other online as much as possible. I'll also be holding office hours for this class once a week on my Discord server. Now, I haven't settled on a day or a time when I will be doing that. Of course, I may do it over multiple days or multiple times. In any case, you can also find the link to my Discord server in the slides for this lecture or in the course outline. And of course, I'll make an announcement when I settle on when exactly the office hours will be. I'll make an announcement on See You Learn. And basically, I'll just be hanging out on Discord, and if you have any questions or if you just want to drop by and talk shop, pop in and we can have a sort of virtual office hours session. What else? Oh, well, there is the possibility that since this is the kind of class that may elicit a lot of questions or discussion, and it's hard to have that kind of discussion perhaps on a forum on See You Learn or in a YouTube comment section, there's the possibility that I may incorporate some kind of small seminar-like discussion on Discord for those who are interested. So if you would be interested in something like that, let me know. Especially since this lack of in-class discussion means that lectures probably will not be as long as they typically are. That would be an interesting way for us to make up that lost time, is just by discussing things virtually. So if any of you are interested in that, do let me know in the comments section. Alright, so as for the description of the course, the description given on your course outline, well, as it says there, this course is an examination in the psychological underpinnings of morality. So we're going to begin by outlining some moral theoretical frameworks, and subsequently, we will move on to look at studies that take place at this intersection of philosophy, psychiatry, cognitive science, and psychology. So it's going to be very interesting, very interdisciplinary. And of course, this being a philosophy course, it assumes familiarity with contemporary moral philosophy. So it assumes that you're familiar with things like consequentialism, or virtue ethics, or deontology. It assumes you know the difference between meta-ethics and normative ethics and applied ethics or practical ethics. So it assumes all of those things, but we will be going over that stuff in the next lecture. So, if you're not familiar with this, if you're not coming from a philosophy background, don't worry about it. We are going to cover that stuff to make sure that everybody's on equal footing before we really get going into the textbook. Of course, this class being so interdisciplinary, the philosophers among you will have the opportunity to engage with some very interesting empirical work in our course text, which I'll talk about in a moment. And of course, the scientists among you will have the opportunity to engage with some really interesting philosophical work. So that's going to be great. But if you're neither a scientist nor a philosopher, if you're just taking this class and your major is other than those two, or if you're just some random person who's stumbled upon this course and wants to watch these videos, that's fine too. Don't panic. I will make sure that everybody is on equal footing with regards to the theoretical stuff you need to know. And of course, I'll make sure that the material is accessible enough for non-philosophers or non-scientists. So don't worry about that. As for the course textbook, we're going to be using this text. This is the Moral Psychology Handbook, which is by John M. Doris and the Moral Psychology Research Group. So this book basically grew out of this research group. The contributors are listed on the back of the copy here. All kinds of interesting big names there. This group would meet, I believe it was once a year, and discuss the psychological underpinnings of morality in an interdisciplinary context. And this textbook has grown out of that. You can find it at the campus bookstore, but I suggest that you contact the bookstore because I'm actually not 100% certain on what their social distancing policies are right now. I don't know if they're allowing people in the store or in what number. But this is where you will get the books, so you will be able to purchase the book from them. I'm just not the one who knows all of the finer details about all of that stuff. Now, we won't need the book for today or for our next lecture, so you still have a little bit of time to get a copy. Of course, you can also find this book on Amazon, although I don't know what delivery times are like nowadays, again, owing to the COVID-19 situation. And you may be able to find it on other fine retailers' websites as well. I'm not sure, but I know that for sure Amazon does carry it. But again, the best place to go is probably the campus bookstore. So give them a call or send them an email, or check their website, see what their current policies are for going and picking up your textbook, and grab yourself a copy for next week. Now, of course, you probably all already have been on CU Learn if you've found this channel, but just in case you haven't, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that all the materials on this course can be found on CU Learn, other than the textbook, of course. So all of my PowerPoint slides, links to my Discord server, links to these video lectures, it can all be found on CU Learn. So although this is an asynchronous course, that is, it's 2 lectures per week without a fixed time, it's still important to keep on top of everything. So check CU Learn regularly to see when the lectures are up. This week is a little hectic, to say the least. However, I imagine that I will settle on a regular lecture schedule. I'm just not sure what that will be. Of course, I'd love to hear from all of you. What days of the week you might like to see the lectures uploaded and around what times. Let me know, and I can sort of settle into that schedule, if that makes things easier for you guys. And of course, don't be afraid to engage with me on CU Learn, engage with each other in the discussion forums, as I mentioned earlier. It'll all be very helpful if there's something you're sort of stuck on as far as the course material goes. All right, so that's it for that. Let's move on. Where are we now, anyway? I think we're on evaluation. Okay. We're not on evaluation, we're on the lecture schedule. So the lecture schedule for this course is sort of spread out across the 7 weeks that the course takes place, and you can find it in these slides or in your course outline. Basically, for the first week, this week, it's this intro and overview and welcome. And then in the following lecture, we're going to be talking about an overview of moral theoretical framework. So I'm going to be talking about things like virtue ethics, deontology, consequentialism, you know, the big 3. I'll also talk a little bit about meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. And I'll talk a little bit more about the difference between psychology and philosophy and what those 2 disciplines do, what makes them different from one another, and how we can combine them to make an interdisciplinary sort of effort at understanding the psychological underpinnings of morality. That is, how do we combine these 2 to do moral psychology. So that's what we'll be talking about there, and that's just directed towards making sure that everybody's on the same kind of footing before we really dive into the textbook. For week 2, we'll be covering chapters 1 and 2 from our course text. So that is the evolution of morality. Very interesting stuff. Why did moral behavior evolve? Why did our ability to make the moral judgments that we could make evolve? Or how did it evolve? Very interesting stuff there. And chapter 2 is multi-system moral psychology. Also very interesting stuff, where we'll be getting into a little bit of neuroscientific research on moral judgments. So that's going to be really fun. For week 3, we're going to move on to moral motivation and moral emotions. Those are both very interesting chapters, and I'm particularly looking forward to the chapter on moral emotions. That'll be a recurring theme throughout this class, is that, you know, philosophers kind of have this idea, well, scientists too for that matter, that we need to be rational, calculating agents in whatever deliberations we're making. This is not really the case with morality and moral cognition. Indeed, emotions are an integral part of moral judgment, as we'll see. So that's one of my favorite chapters. I'm really looking forward to that one. In week 4, we'll be covering altruism and moral reasoning. Both also pretty cool chapters, if you ask me. In week 5, we're going to turn to moral intuitions for the first lecture and character for the next lecture. Moral intuitions is another one of my favorites. Again, because it kind of flies in the face of the, I guess that sort of way in which humans are understood by a lot of philosophers as rational animals. Again, when it comes to morality, it's really not that simple, and the chapter on moral intuitions really drives that point home. Likewise with character, but without getting ahead of myself, won't talk too much about that stuff at the present time. For week 6, we're going to be talking about well-being, the chapter on well-being, and also the chapter on race and racial cognition. So that'll be very interesting as well. And then finally, for the last week of class, I thought what I would do is have a special topics lecture. So this is something that I typically do in, well, all of my classes. Basically, we come up as a group, all of us together, as a couple, we come up with a couple of possible essay topics that are related to the course but not found in the textbook. Everybody votes, and then I lecture on the winner. And it's just a fun way of kind of getting out of the textbook and applying what we've learned to something new. So that's really fun. So that's it for the lecture schedule. This may be subject to minor changes. And again, this is all asynchronous, so it's 2 lectures per week. At the present moment, I don't have a fixed time, but if you guys would like a more regular schedule, let me know, and over the next couple weeks, we'll settle into a regular schedule when it comes to the lecture materials. Alright, so that's it for the lecture schedule. Now let's move on to the course evaluation scheme. The evaluation for this class is pretty straightforward. Firstly, there are 4 take-home quizzes. Pretty much everything is going to be take-home in this class because, well, it has to be. So there are these 4 take-home quizzes, each worth 5% of your grade, and they're not just a simple way to earn marks. They're also designed to be a way to keep your skills sharp, to keep your knowledge sharp as we move through the course. So, for example, quiz 1 will be on some of the material from this week. It'll be fairly light, obviously, because we're only having one really substantive lecture this week. So that will be due at the end of week 2, and the rest of the quizzes will follow the same sort of pattern. They'll be open for the entire week as well. So the quiz number 2, for example, will be on the material from week 2, but it will be due at midnight on the Friday of week 3. So you have the subsequent week to write the quiz, and the quiz will not be difficult. It's going to consist of multiple choice questions and those kinds of things. Again, it's aimed at kind of shoring up all the stuff you'll be learning and making sure that it's still fresh in your mind. We'll also be having a take-home midterm test. That will take place on, or rather not take place on May 29th, but it'll be due May 29th at 11:59 p.m. I'll probably give you a couple days to complete it, so that you can choose the best time, or the best day, or the best time out of a range of days. But then once you begin, you'll only have like a fixed amount of time to complete it. So you can do it at the best time for you, but once you start, you'll only have a limited amount of time to finish it. And something similar will go for a part of the final take-home exam. Some of it will be a lot like the midterm. The midterm, by the way, covers material up into the week of the midterm, and the final will cover material from after that till the end of the course. The midterm, of course, is worth 35% of your final grade, and the final take-home exam is worth 45% of your final grade. There is no essay in this class, but there will be a kind of essay question component on the final exam, which I'll talk about in a moment. Oh, and I nearly forgot to mention, all the quizzes, the test, and the exam are open book. So you can use your course materials. If you've taken notes as you watch these lectures, you can use those. You can use all of that stuff. Just remember, don't rely on the open book nature of these tests because there is still limited time to complete them once you begin. So I do highly recommend preparing before you start writing because you only get the one attempt and there will be a time limit. Okay, what else? Well, I guess other than the special topics lecture, there'll be one little bit of homework you're going to have to do for this class. There's going to be a film that I'm going to have you watch, and the essay question component of the final exam will be aimed at using what you've learned from this class to address the moral problems raised in the film. I haven't mentioned what film this is yet. I'll probably do so later on, and you can watch it at your convenience. Nonetheless, I think this is a fun way, like the special topics lectures, to kind of get out of the textbook and do something different and interesting. So I will get you guys to watch a film that contains some interesting moral, psychological, or moral theoretical problems, and you'll have to use what you've learned in this class to discuss those problems and answer the questions. All right, I think that about covers it for tests and examinations and the lecture schedule and a lot of that bureaucratic stuff. But if I haven't answered all of the questions, if you have a question that maybe is about something I haven't covered here, let me know in the comments section or send me an email. For now, let's just move on for a very, very brief sort of orientation to moral psychology. So remember, this class is like an interdisciplinary dive into the psychological underpinnings of morality. So it would be pretty helpful to just kind of give a sense of what psychologists on the one hand do and what philosophers on the other hand do, typically. And again, these are kind of like breadcrumbs that I'm dropping here. We're going to talk about all of this in much more detail during our next lecture. So this is the kind of thing that lecture will be about, and I will post some recommended readings for those who are interested in taking a look at those. Again, this next lecture is not going to cover material from the textbook, and you probably won't need to do too much extra reading, but it will be there if you think that it will be helpful for you. So, an interdisciplinary dive into the psychological underpinnings of morality. So, psychology, what is it that psychologists do? Well, for a long time, psychology was just the study of behavior. Behaviorism was the dominant paradigm in psychology during the early 20th century. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I do have an online lecture from a previous course that you can take a look at, which I'll link around here somewhere. So, psychology really, for a long time, was the psychology of behavior. And then during the cognitive revolution, when we got cognitive psychology, that's when psychologists really started focusing on how people think. And again, I'll go into more detail on this in my next lecture. But of course, these are not the only areas of psychology that there are. There are many, many areas of psychology, and we'll probably be touching on more than just behavioral psychology or cognitive psychology in this class. For example, we might touch on personality psychology, especially when we get to the chapter on character. We'll probably also talk a little bit about clinical psychology here and there. So there are many, many areas of psychology nowadays, but psychology is meant to be a science. It's meant to be descriptive, right? And of course, we'll see as the course unfolds how these different disciplines contribute, these different subdisciplines of psychology, I should say, contribute to understanding the psychological underpinnings of morality. But because we're talking about morality, we can't do it with just psychology. We've got to include a little bit of philosophy as well. So the kind of philosophy that we're concerned with in this class in particular is moral philosophy. So moral philosophy or morality is all about what is good, right? Studying what is good, what kinds of acts or things are good or desirable. And this is all closely related to another couple of branches of philosophy, which we'll probably touch on as we go. Those are ethics, which is all about how to live a good life. And axiology as well, which is all about how we live a meaningful life or how we find value in our lives. And of course, moral philosophers approach morality and ethics in a number of different ways. They do it in fundamental ways, like with meta-ethics, where we ask questions like what right and wrong are, or what the good is, or whether any of these things really exist, all the way to normative ethics, where we're dealing with different ethical or moral theoretical frameworks, like the three I mentioned before, deontology, virtue ethics, consequentialism, those kinds of things. All the way to practical ethics or applied ethics. You know, how does all of this actually work in practice in the real world? And we'll be talking a lot about that as the course unfolds. So things to keep in mind are how all of these more theoretical or even pre-theoretical philosophical questions can inform our study of the psychological underpinnings of morality, together with the empirical approaches from psychology. I mentioned psychology is descriptive. Philosophy could be thought of as normative or prescriptive. So where psychology is looking at the way things are in terms of how humans behave, philosophy looks at how humans ought to behave, right? What is good? How should we act if we want to be good? And those kinds of things. Now, of course, especially when we talk about the area of normative ethics, we've got those three different ethical theories, the big three, and that's probably where our focus will be as we carry on throughout this course: consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics. And those are where those readings that I recommended will probably focus, just to get everyone up to speed with these moral theoretical frameworks. But essentially, and again, I'm going to go into this in far more detail in our next lecture, but essentially consequentialism is all about acts well, not just acts, that's a particular kind of consequentialism, but on consequentialism, as the name implies, what is good or bad depends on what the consequences are of particular actions or particular judgments or whatever. On deontology, that's where we're concerned with duty. I mean, deontology is very Kantian. Here we're concerned about rules and duties and responsibilities. And I'll have a lot more to say about that next week as well. Virtue ethics is probably the oldest of these three. It goes all the way back to Aristotle, and it's all about practical wisdom, finding good ends and setting out how to achieve them, the golden mean, all that classic Aristotelian stuff is what we find in virtue ethics. And again, I'm going to cover this in more detail next week. But, in the meantime, as you're doing these readings, keep in mind how these different moral theoretical frameworks might inform our study of the psychological underpinnings of morality. Indeed, if you have any ideas or any questions or any thoughts at all about how any of this might contribute to the psychological underpinnings of morality, whether it be moral theoretical frameworks or areas of philosophy or particular branches of psychology, let us all know in the comment section. Let's get some discussion going. Let's talk to one another. So let's see what you think so far before we get into the material, before we really get into the thick of it. I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section for this course. So go ahead and do that if you feel so inclined, or even drop me an email, or we'll talk about it on Discord or something. All right, so let's move on. All right, right, so to kind of sum everything up for the when it comes to the general, I guess, theme or direction of the class, I've just noticed there's a typo in my slides here. Well, more psychology, that's supposed to say moral psychology. Uses all these approaches from psychology and philosophy, and as we'll see, not just psychology, but other cognitive sciences as well. Neuroscience, linguistics even, although we won't be covering that chapter in this textbook. All kinds of different approaches from philosophy and the cognitive sciences to understand the psychological underpinnings of morality. And we're going to use the materials in this book to try to gain an understanding or answer questions like what makes people act in the right or the wrong way in particular circumstances. Why people form the judgments they do, the moral judgments that they do, as well as how people come to form those moral judgments cognitively and behaviorally. We'll look at questions like whether these moral theoretical frameworks that I mentioned previously actually inform how people reason about right and wrong and good and bad. You know, we've got all these fancy philosophical theories. Do they actually describe how people make these moral judgments, or do they tell us anything about people's moral behavior? That's a really interesting question that we're going to tackle here. And on the flip side of that, does studying moral cognition inform, or can it inform, those moral theoretical frameworks from philosophy? So there's going to be a bit of back and forth here because this is so interdisciplinary. I love interdisciplinary work, by the way, and I think that's the reason why I pursued cognitive science rather than philosophy. Not that there's anything wrong with philosophy. I love philosophy, but I also love getting interdisciplinary, and that's why I think this class is going to be so fun. I know that I had a wonderful time teaching it last time, and although the present situation makes things a little bit weird, you know, it's a strange thing to be lecturing to a camera right now, but I hope to see a lot of engagement from all of you. I'm going to do my best to make this course very engaging in spite of the fact that we don't get to meet in person, and I'm looking forward to getting the chance to talk to all of you in the comments section, on See You Learn, on Discord. I think this is going to be a very interesting class. It's going to move quickly, and we're going to cover a lot of material, but I think you'll find it very engaging, and I hope you get something out of it, and I hope you enjoy it just a little bit as much as the blah blah blah. Anyway, that. All this is to say, I hope you enjoy this class as much as I will enjoy this class, and I'm going to do my best to make it enjoyable and engaging for you. So, that's all for today. Just to recap, welcome everybody once again. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you're looking forward to getting into this material. I look forward to talking to all of you on one electronic medium or another. As we go, we will settle on a more regular schedule, and of course I will begin office hours next week on Discord, and we can talk about the possibility of maybe having some kind of regular or semi-regular sort of meetings in Discord in case we want to make up for this lack of in-class discussion, because typically this is the kind of class that elicits a lot of in-class discussion, and I would like to be able to do that in some form or another virtually, whether it's on Discord or in the comments section. So if we can figure out a way to make that happen, I think that would make this class even more engaging for all of you. So next time we're going to be diving into more about psychology on the one hand and philosophy on the other. We'll talk about the differences in methodologies and approaches in each of those disciplines. I'll cover some moral theoretical frameworks to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page before we dive into the textbook. And if there are any questions in the meantime, let me know. I'll try to answer them in some form or another, perhaps in my next video or by email or on See You Learn, in whatever form I get these questions. So that's all for now. I'm looking forward to taking this learning journey with all of you. I hope you're looking forward to it too, and I'll see you next time.